So since I've been working with one-bit audio in electronic music and in my composed work, I've been focused mostly on one-bit tones, pure tones, just the periodic oscillation between 1 and 0. And in my own music, I've been attracted to that as sort of this extremely simple operation, just this kind of constant oscillation to create a pitch is something that's very, very elegant in code, and it's just a very, very basic way of creating sound. At the other end of the spectrum, there is randomness, pure randomness, which is essentially sounds like white noise, or more technically brownian noise. This digital randomness creating sound. And I used it in the first one-bit album as just a percussive element to create a kind of rhythm track against the harmonic kind of melodic material. And I've had it at the back of my mind as something that might be interesting to explore musically. But I've sort of stayed away from it because I've been working purely in this tonal range. And it's funny because I've been making these drawings made by machine which explore the intersection of randomness and order. And so it's like my music has been focused mostly on the order side of that. And I'm starting to think about the randomness side. So this piece for Mantra is, for me, it's like an in-depth exploration of white noise against percussion. And in this case, the direction it's heading is to be a piece for multiple cymbals, which are these different colors of noise. And it's something I started with a piece for Pamplemousse, Ensemble Pamplemousse, a couple years ago, exploring these sort of rhythmic treatments of noise in these with extended technique on the different instruments. But in this piece, I think it's going to sort of cement it to something that's I don't know. I think I'm really excited about this kind of more austere treatment of this idea. So in my tonal work with one-bit audio, I've had the microchip outputting these patterns of ones and zeros, these on and off pulses of electricity to make just kind of constant tones, which this is for instance, like, let's call this something like that. And there's something called, that's interesting about waveforms of this kind, which is the duty cycle, and right now it's 50%, so you have like 50% on and then 50% off. But you can have, for instance, a duty cycle that's only 10% on or something, and it might look more like this. So the tone has the same period, but like it'll create the same pitch, but it'll have a slightly different. The speaker is pushing out only 10% of the tone and then pulling back, and it'll kind of sound more tinny. Now, the kind of waveforms that I'm working with for the Mantra piece, and suddenly this conversation is getting very technical, but they're based on randomness, on this kind of digital randomness, where you pick a random number and maybe you compare it to some sort of threshold, and then if it's above, and then you output a 1, and if it's below, you output a 0. So your waveform might kind of look like more random. It's incredibly hard as a human being to generate something random, and that's actually one of the reasons that I was interested in exploring randomness in code, is because code has this like unbiased approach, and even though code can only do pseudo-randomness, that it's incapable of the kind of randomness that comes out of the physical world, that it has only this algorithmic randomness that looks random but actually is based on procedure, that it's still way, way better at being random than us. So if if I try to write like a series of ones and zeros that are actually random, like if I do this for a while, it'll become less and less random, more and more clear that it's created by me who has a pattern brain and thinks in terms of patterns. So in the case of this like random noise, that 1-bit noise that I'm generating with these microchips, we can sort of like look at this waveform and see that maybe on average it sort of like oscillates the same number of times as like this waveform might. And so that means that like these two waveforms like push the speaker out and pull it back, let's say on average the same number of times per second. And so they kind of have the same energy associated with the waveform, like the energy that we learn how like shorter period, higher frequency corresponds to more energy. That allows me to sort of set up a sort of pitch system that is based on, like, if you have a random wave that oscillates like less often but it's still random, like that might be more similar to this original wave, and these might be more related or something like that. That's kind of what I'm trying to explore in this piece, I guess. So this sort of more technical approach, this more conceptual system that I'm working in, only goes so far. And for me, it's about creating some kind of meaningful framework for creating music or for creating visual art. It's about sort of, it's kind of like a little bit like coming up with some instrumentation or some idea for a piece of music that has some sort of conceptual approach to it, but at some point you have to write the piece of music. So I'm trying to set up these systems in such a way that the music can reflect them in some way that also comments on these physical principles or in these ideas from computer science or from mathematics that I find interesting and that have gone into the system, but that in the end the drawings that I create with my drawing machine are just drawings. They're ink on paper, and that's all I really want them to be. And the pieces of music I create are also, just pieces of music. And the framework is a way of connecting. It's a way of giving me something I can populate with content. And the content for me, I'm a little bit traditional in this sense as a composer and an artist. The content comes sort of from my hand or something. It's I don't rely on these systems to actually create my music, to generate the music, the score, or anything like that. That sort of comes the old-fashioned way. To me, the systems are just like new instruments, and I'm trying to populate them with repertoire, I guess, with musical ideas that are somehow also something worth listening to. I don't know.